He would say stuff like, the only reason I keep you around is so I can see the grandkids. You'll never make it without. This was a constant, everyday thing. You're not going to make it. Your credit stinks. Nobody wants you. It was just put downs all the time. Of my self-esteem was gone. I didn't see no hope. I didn't see any end. I'll be honest, I wanted to kill myself. I had thought I was so unhappy and I didn't know how to get out of it. So I needed some outlet to talk to somebody. I was so miserable. I don't know how many times I thought about driving off the bridge on my way to work or whatever. I just, sometimes when you feel trapped, you don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. So I said, I didn't believe in counseling, and I snuck and went to counseling because I needed something. I needed to talk to somebody about something, you know, because something inside was not right. So I went to her. I went to her almost 6 months. He didn't know I snuck. I went to her at first 3 times a week, then 2, and then 1. When I got married to him, sick, whatever, you're supposed to stay with him, you know, and it was a good marriage, the first half. And I didn't want to leave him because he was sick too, on top of whatever he was doing extra to make him sicker. He retired from the military, his mom passed away, and he didn't know how he was going to support his family, and he started drinking when we moved here. He drank some before, but excess when we moved here. I think the transition of everything that happened, he needed help and he didn't know how to reach out and get it. He was a great guy. The first 10 years, he was great. Never said an unkind word to me, loved me unconditionally. And that's the only thing I can figure that happened, the changes when we moved here. It was just downhill since we moved here. It just got worse and worse. I knew something wasn't safe anymore there for me, so I had been talking to my therapist about separating and going on my own, because I started feeling good about myself when I started going to therapy. She told me about the shelter, and she said, it's not safe anymore. I think you need to call them and see if you can live there. The house I lived in was inherited from his grandfather, so my name wasn't on it, so I knew I would be the one to leave if anything was serious. So that the next day I left with just my car and myself, and I called the shelter, and they redirected me to come to their shelter, and it was hard. I was about the hardest thing I ever had to do, is just to decide to leave, but it was the best decision I ever made.
Donna came into our emergency shelter initially, and that's how most folks end up over here at transitional housing. They will start at our emergency shelter, and then they will apply to come over here. She had been in a very lengthy relationship. She had been isolated from a lot of her support network. And so she was really very, very, very shy and timid.
We moved here and I didn't know anybody, or I'm like, I'm from the city, you moved us in the middle of nowhere.
Hardly was able to speak with me during the first interview. She was, it's hard for her to make eye contact. She sort of looked down and mumbled.
You're like in a bubble, you know, anything outside the bubble doesn't matter, or you can't go outside that bubble.
Donna was in a long-term relationship, and it was not the first abusive relationship that she'd been in, and that's a pattern that we'll see fairly frequently. Her relationship also was typical in many ways in that the abuse was more emotional and verbal and financial and just controlling than it was physical abuse. And very often that's the type of abuse that's hard for somebody to recognize. It's hard for people out in the community to recognize, but also hard for a victim to recognize and label as being domestic violence. So I don't know that Donna initially felt that she was a victim of domestic violence. That might not have been the way she would have labeled it until we began talking with her a lot about controlling types of behavior and that sort of thing. And then she sort of began to recognize, oh yeah, that was my situation.
What they do is they isolate you, and they do what they do good. And then everybody around you is like, leave them. Why don't you just leave them? And I'm like, you don't understand. It's not that easy. And it wasn't easy. I'll be honest with you. It was not easy just to get up and walk away of a life I had for 25 years, even if it was bad.
She really had to take a step down in many, many ways to be safe. And I really wish that was not a price that people had to pay to be safe, is to give up their home and their family and come and move into, an apartment and where there are, rules and various things. I wish that wasn't a price that they had to pay. And she really did have to pay that, and I think it spoke a lot to how strong she was, but also how much she really needed to get out of that situation.
I even had a lawyer give me advice. Just go back to him. He's on disability. You're going to get retirement soon, or you're going to get Social Security. Just go back. My parents did. You can do it. I said, what kind of advice is that? That's silly advice there. No, that's why I don't want to go back. And my mom was in a situation. So it carries on to the next relationship or in the family. It just carries. I could see my situation was the same almost as my mom, what she took from my stepdad. I want to break that. That's not how you treat people. That's not okay. That's not okay. And I'm not going to, it's not okay.
Most of the sort of helping hand types of things that we have, she just did not qualify for those kinds of things. Low-income housing, food stamps, those sorts of things. All of those kinds of programs are really set up with younger families in mind. And it just seemed like she slipped through the cracks in a whole lot of areas. And I think that would probably be true of a lot of folks in her position. I think one of the biggest barriers for anybody who's a victim of trauma, and specifically, especially, I guess, older victims of trauma, is that they've really become isolated from other people, and trust has become a really huge issue. And so it takes a long time to develop that. And I think we sit here and we have an open door policy in the office, and so we just invite people to drop in. And I typically ask people when they move in, is it okay if I don't see you, that I come up and knock on your door? Is that okay for you? And most of the time they'll say, sure, I won't do it if they don't ask me to do it, but we'll go up and knock on the door and say, would you like to come down for lunch? Would you like to come down and talk? So it's a real open kind of atmosphere.
The Resource Center gave me the backbone and say, hey, you can do this. You can do whatever you want. We're here. If you fall, we'll pick you up. It's okay. It's a learning process for you, and but we're still going to be here no matter what. And just the backing of them being with me through the divorce and just talking to me, that did me wonders.
I think another turning point for her was she went to some event down in the park down here and entered a raffle, and she won a kayak. And that was a real turning point for her in terms of changing her outlook on taking care of herself.
The sign said, win a kayak, and I was like, man, that would be so great if I won that because I'm kayaking. And I said, I never win anything. So I did three for $10 raffle for the K9 kayak, and I didn't know my phone number, so I had to give them my daughter's number. So I called in, and I did win a kayak, a $500 kayak, really nice kayak. And the police officer said, would you like me to bring it tonight or tomorrow? And it was downpouring. I said, you can bring it right now. Bring it over.
And then she quit smoking, and now she regularly plays pickleball, if you're familiar with pickleball.
I play 4 times a week now for 3 hours straight. And had to force myself to get out and talk to people because I was so isolated before. I needed to be around people.
To see and to think about that person that I first interviewed who could barely make eye contact and barely speak above a mumbly kind of whisper. To see her speaking in front of our annual fundraising event. There were about 300, 400 people in a huge room.
I can tell you when I was in high school, I took a 0 for a book report. I wouldn't speak at all because I was very shy. When I speak, and if I can give back to what they've given me, I'm more grateful to do that for them. What it was the first year I stayed with them, I was a mess. I kid you not, I was a mess trying to figure out who I was, where I was going. I felt like an 18-year-old. But speaking helps me heal. It makes me feel good if I can help somebody else. The second year, because it's a fundraiser and a lot of people don't know where their donations and their funds go to, people like me. And I wanted them to see how far I came just in the 1 year because of them donating and because of what they gave me, the Women's Resource Center, through the funds of the people. What I had to go through is just my experience. I can't tell you somebody else's. It's almost like you have to rediscover your whole self again. And you have this time to do it. And it took so long to get at that place that you were at. And you're so confused and you're so lost. And it's almost easy to go back. I get the voices, you're not gonna make it. I get those voices like a recorder. I couldn't do it on my own. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the Women's Resource Center. It's work, and I'm a work in progress. But it's a good thing, and the outcome is great. I mean, I get teary-eyed because I'm so happy right now. And that's worth anything and everything to me.